Good morning, beautiful people of the internet, and welcome once more to the Sunday Special Live. We're back, as always, and we're joined. It's a full house. We have Piotr Rusinek, Helen Chorley, and the indomitable Adam Lawrence. And today we are talking about risk, but not just risk as a concept, but what is your appetite to risk? And one of the ways we're going to go through that is we're going to ask everyone on the call today what their appetite to risk is. What risks do they find acceptable? What risks do they find unacceptable? And what are their metrics to figuring out what is right and what is wrong for them? And hopefully that will provide some context and some clarity as to how you should approach risk. And what resonates with you is most likely what is going to be your risk level that you're going to be happy with. So let's kick it off. Who's up first?
I think Helen should start. This is Helen's baby topic. This is Helen's pet project. Helen should start.
Well, it's the R word, isn't it? It's all our favourite topics, really. But yeah, risk appetite. We chose this because of a couple of questions we got in one of our previous calls, where people were asking for advice or recommendations about what to do with a pot of cash that they had. And very often and we all get these questions every day of the week. And I think very often people are looking for strategies. They want to know, should they go into buy-to-let? Should they do HMOs? Should they do rent-to-rent? Like, what's the strategy? But actually, the fundamental starting point is assessing where you are now and what your own risk appetite is. What is your capacity in a financial, in an emotional, in so many senses? What ability do you have? What resilience, what resources do you have to take that investment decision and kind of step along that path? Then you can, once you've assessed that, then you have a much better chance of succeeding in whichever path you choose and making a better choice about which of the paths is most appropriate for you. So, I mean, very often we think about it in a financial sense. Like somebody was asking, if I've got a pot of 40 grand, what do I do? Well, do you want to put that all in one venture? Like, that's from a kind of diversification perspective, that could be considered quite risky, although it might be needed on whatever kind of strategy, whatever niche you pursue. So you need to weigh that up. You need to look at, if that 40 grand was to disappear, you do it, it goes wrong, it's gone. What impact does that have on your life? What capacity do you have to make it back again? Or to, does it mean you are literally on the breadline? There's nothing in reserves. You can't even afford, Sainsbury's own baked beans. What impact does that have on you? And also, like, what would that do to you mentally? Because I don't think people very often consider those impacts as well, which can be just as detrimental, kind of actually, if not more so, than the financial impacts as well. So that's kind of always my starting point with this topic, with people that haven't heard of the risk appetite, that phrase before. It's very common in banking and investing, but it's not widely discussed in property necessarily. Although there was a great article in Property Investor News, I think it was last year. Anyway, DM me if you want that article. I can send it to you. And there's a recording on the Property Investor News website of a webinar that I did about it, where I went in really deep into this topic. I'm not sure it didn't go above most people's heads, but I did my best and I enjoyed it. So, hey.
A deep dove, if you will, a deep dove. I think it's a really, really good way to start approaching the problem, if you like, of having any money at all, because I'm lucky enough to have a few conversations a year with people who are about to come into significant amounts of money. So perhaps they're selling a business, they're one sole stream of income, and then they're thinking what they might do with it. Perhaps they've had a payout from something. It might be an inheritance. It might be something else. And they can start from the premise of, well, if I put it, the US stock market returns about 10% a year. Okay. Yeah, it does over time on average in dollars, right? So we're introducing it. So I always ask them the same question. I say, okay, so you've got 3 million quid, and then that goes into the market tomorrow, and then within a month it's down 28%, right? Because a big meltdown happens, as big meltdowns are prone to do. Now, over time, that money's all going to come back, right? And then there's going to be some more, and we know that. But similar to what Helen said, will you be able not to press the button to liquidate those positions? You know, what impact will it have on your mental health? How much will you, you know, I have stock investments and things like that. I don't look at the performance of them at all, right? Apart from once a year, right? Because I don't want to know what they're doing day to day. I'm a monstrous fan of Warren Buffett. He is my all-time icon of how to go about a number of things in business and life. Even though Warren doesn't really like real estate, I've tried to modify Warren's philosophy and apply it to real estate. Not that I'm suggesting I'm ever going to be worth $100 billion or even better, giving away. I think he's given away $30 or $40 billion to what he deems to be good causes, which is pretty bloody incredible, apart from anything else. But, you know, it does come down to the same principles, which is more Dalio than Buffett, isn't it, principles? But it does come down to the same investment principles. And I see, you know, good, solid, you know, I've seen people answer risk appetite questionnaires where the questionnaire is not the ideal way to do it, but there's got to be a mechanism.
Yeah.
And they just choose all of the things down the left hand side, which basically say, I never want to risk anything, I never want to lose any money ever under any circumstance. Well, you know what, those people aren't really cut out for even bond investing, because 2022 would prove that to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can buy bonds that have got a yield, but where are the risks still in bonds? You know, inflation is a massive risk, and the value of the bond goes down when interest rates go up and the market price and the yields go up. The value of your bond goes down. So you can still lose money doing that. And even if you're not looking at losing money in absolute terms, you should be looking in real terms, which is something that we're really bad at overall. You know, the whole of the media is geared toward what's house prices of this, house prices of that. It's like, how about inflation adjusted house prices?
Yeah.
Because the one thing that we do right in economics as a whole, in media economics, the circus of media economics, is when we talk about GDP, we're talking about inflation adjusted GDP, right? Nothing else that we talk about, the FTSE, right, the house prices, nothing else is inflation adjusted. Nothing, right? And these are terrible mistakes that we make, because all we're doing, we're not thinking about affordability. We're not thinking about this, that, and the other. We're just thinking about, is the number higher or lower, and how does that make us feel? So the way that I've trained my brain to cope with this stuff is I've moved it outside of my sphere of what I care about on a day-to-day basis, and just said, right, I trust the process. I believe in the process. Let the process carry on. Right? If I went to bed every night thinking, I wonder if the housing market is up or down today, you know, I'd be bloody insane. I wouldn't be able to move in the morning, or I'd wake up delirious with joy, or, you know, crushed with sorrow. Jay asked the question about sort of personal risk appetite, and I would say mine is a bit stringy, really, because it's very high for the right sort of thing. Yeah. For the right proportion of my net worth, which would be a very low proportion. As in, I will throw a dart of X £1,000 at something that might make me X £1,000,000.
Yeah.
Right? And the way I would look at that is, you know, if I'm going to get 100 times payoff and we're going to pull it off one time in 8, yeah, I might have a go at it. If you want 100 grand to have a go at throwing that dart, I'm not going to have a go at it, because that's too much money in terms of the percentage of my net worth versus the probability of failure. Right now, this is a very clinical and mathematical way to look at things, but which won't surprise anyone who's ever listened to me talk before. But this is the concept of expected value and understanding that. But the point really is I can afford to do that because I've got a very, very low risk core asset base, which has significant utility because it's residential property, and a steady stream of income because in a portfolio, yes, you have arrears, yes, you have voids, yes, you have maintenance, and maintenance can be volatile, but generally speaking, you have a stream of income that people pay every month, and therefore you have a bond style investment without the volatility necessarily in the price of the underlying asset. And that's what makes residential property particularly so great, because you have low risk and very reasonable returns. Nothing that's going to get you, if you've got 40k, as Helen was saying, and you want to do something exciting with it, buy to let is not going to excite you, right? Yeah. But if you can put 40k aside every year to start with, and then you can reinvest all of those proceeds in a limited company, you'll start by buying 1 or 2 a year, and then you'll get to 2 or 3 and 3 or 4, and then the old, going back to Warren, if you ever look at his net worth, it goes like a hockey stick. So it's very, very good. He's a very, very talented guy, but it's in the millions and millions, and then towards the end of his life, it starts to go like this, and he gets up to the first billion is the hardest, right? That's what they say, yeah. So and then the next 5, and then it goes literally 1, 5, 25, 100. Bloody hell, I better give some of this away because it's just getting silly, sort of thing, And also, he says himself, it's much part of the advantage of having a smaller amount of capital, bearing in mind what Helen said, how much can you afford to lose it, and what impact will that have on your mental health in trying to get it back, rather than just the time spent in getting it back. Ultimately, it's also really important to understand, with a smaller amount of money, it is easier to get higher returns. When you've got 100 billion, or he's in charge of about $600 billion, right, Berkshire Hathaway, it's not going to be the case that they're going to be worth 1.2 trillion next year. They can't find opportunities to double their money. Whereas he says himself, give him $1 million and he'll find a way to double it. Now, that's because he understands company analysis. And in order to do all of that stuff, you have to be prepared to bet against the market as well, which is another session altogether, probably. But that's my risk appetite in a nutshell, I think, and my thoughts.
Right. I'm a big fan of a worst case scenario kind of analysis, because like when I get comfortable with what's the worst that can happen with something, it's then it's almost like that protects me from the impact of it if it happens, and it just kind of gets me ready to get whatever I need to get from like the exciting stuff, the big payouts, the this and that, and then it also takes away like for me that emotional kind of burden, because like if you don't really analyze the worst case scenario of something, you never really know exactly what happens. It's kind of like uncertain, and it's kind of like you're hoping for things, but it's like you're hoping also the worst thing isn't gonna happen because you haven't analyzed it. And I usually start with that when I get too excited about something. I'm like, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen here? and if I'm happy with the worst thing, then okay, let's just give it a go, because but also I have a completely different risk appetite, and I see how my risk appetite changes, because like when I was 18, I had like, I don't know, 130 pounds, and I came to the UK and I was like, okay, fuck it, let's just do it. What's the worst thing that can happen? And it worked out pretty well. But like, would I do this again right now? Like have 100, maybe say 500 with the inflation adjusted prices. Like if I had 500, would I go to a different country, like completely not knowing anything? Probably, maybe not. But it's like we grow with our risk appetite and how we adjust things. And I also believe like if there are other people involved, our risk appetite changes. And it's important to like bear in mind who else is kind of might be impacted by our bad choices, and how we're gonna react in those kind of circumstances.
The changing thing is a really good point, because there's a number of things that affect how it changes. So age is definitely one of them, and actually I've seen it go both ways. So it's not to say it decreases as you get older. But actually your capacity to take on risk very often increases as you get older. So actually you see people taking more risks, but kind of like because they have, like perhaps more money in the bank, or they have a buffer, so they'll take selected and small risks, as Adam was on about. But it's also, I think it's something people don't think about, and particularly from my perspective, that risk appetite or the risk you're exposed to changes over a development project as well, depending on what's happening, particularly if there's planning included, for example. So it's like you say, actually, if you think about these things at the beginning, and it's a question I always ask developers, tell me what the worst case scenario is, because then if it happens, then we know what we're dealing with. Then we can put in a plan. Then we can put in a structure or a legal way of protecting the capital from my perspective. But you know what you're dealing with. Like, I think about one of the first projects I ever did. And I said, like, literally, I'm like, display it for me. And he showed me all the different options. And it was a small development. It's like, if it doesn't sell on time when we need it to do so, for the prices that we need to do so, we're going to need to put in like a bit of extra cash. And it wasn't a huge amount of cash. But I needed to know that. He needed to be brave enough to have that conversation with me and risk me going, no, I don't even want to risk losing any money. He had to do that, because if that scenario had happened, I had to have the cash to be able to put into that project, else we were both fucked, basically. So you need to have those conversations up front to be prepared. And that's the key with risk. It's not eliminating it. You can never eliminate all of it. By the very fact that you're dealing with another person or another entity, you have counterparty risk. That's what we would call it in banking. So, like, unless you're just doing stuff on your own, which then you have a whole new set of risks, you can't eliminate every single risk. Can you try and mitigate it? Can you try and manage it? Yes, you can, if you understand it and you look at things in detail. Like you say, not just looking at oh my God, we're going to make zillions, rose-tinted glasses. Like look at the other end of the spectrum too. And then, then your whole kind of like territory's mapped out before you. Great point.
Very good.
I always look at risk as it's something that permeates every element of your existence, right? You have the risk of going to the toilet and then breaking your leg, for instance, right? That's a real risk.
It's a very unlikely scenario. I don't know anybody who would do such a thing.
I can speak to the validity of that statement, Mr. Lawrence. Anyway, but the way that I always come from risk is an element of disparity, right? Especially in investing in real estate. So the way I see it is there is a disparity between what you have, what you want, and how you're going to get there. There's a disparity between the price of something and the value of something, and there's risk in that. There is a disparity between the start of something and the end of something and the process it has to go through. Mm-hmm. There is a disparity in your knowledge when you start, the knowledge when you finish, and the lessons you take away with you. So the idea of risk for me is, how do you, like Helen said, manage and mitigate that risk as much as possible? Obviously, me and Piotr work together. So Piotr's worst case scenario is actually brilliant. It's one of the things that we look at when we look at any deal. I mean, when we're starting to look at exciting, go, oh, it could be this. And we're like, what if it went wrong? And then we have to sit down and break the deal to pieces, right? You've just got really excited about something. And it can be a little heartbreaking to go, okay, let's just tear this to pieces. Let's just think of every single thing that can go wrong and then exacerbate it, make it 10 times worse, 20 times worse, whatever. But one of the things that we do is whenever something looks, feels, tastes, touch, smells like it's changing or going wrong, we reassess again. So we say to ourselves, okay, does that worst case scenario element we came up with, is that now coming into force? If so, how do we recover from this, or how do we make this a positive? And it can happen in any way. And it happens all the time. I mean, we've done some really good deals, but to say that they are smooth, easy, no fault, no issue, no drama deals it's the biggest pile of BS you could ever be told.
You're never going to sell any courses with this attitude, Jay. I tell you, what are you playing at?
Well, fortunately, we make money in more legitimate ways than selling a sizzle instead of just what it is. It's sausage. All right, that's just
worst case scenario. There's no sausage, right? It's not vegan sausage. It's no sausage. That's the problem.
No sausage. In fact, all you're dealing with is spitting fat and a fire risk. That's it.
That's a good analogy, that is. I can imagine standing in front of the pan, marshalling over the no sausage whatsoever. Yeah. Very, very good.
That's as much as it can be a bit of a cringy subject. It is really a mindset thing. You know, people always talk about, I'm solution focused. I'm always looking at solving a problem. Well, yeah, of course you are. In this frame of mind, absolutely. Let's pile on 50 times the amount of stress, pressure, not just your own stress, your own family stress and pressure. Maybe you've borrowed money from a bank or another human being. Let's just turn the heat up a little bit on this empty frying pan and see how you handle it there, because it is completely different. And you see the mistakes that people make under those degrees of pressure. So it's not a case of, oh yeah, you can solve a problem, or you envisage yourself as a problem solver. What have you solved in the past? And are you in the same position now, or have you increased your capacity to solve problems rather than you're now in a position where you're at a complete emotional burnout from solving that last problem, but you have the confidence thinking, why, I scraped through that, I can do it again. Well, some might say that the foundations and the fundamentals of where you were last time have changed drastically. So it's not a past results are a key indicator of future success. It's not necessarily that either. And I think people have put themselves in silly positions because they have assumed that because someone is experienced and has done well in the past, that's going to carry forward into the future. And what I mean by that is not that person is not going to be successful in the future, but don't let that single metric blind you to looking at the risks involved with a project, B, an asset class, C, a type of return, D, a strategy that you're looking to employ, blah, 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 blah. You should still keep your senses keen. And as much as it's comforting knowing that maybe there's someone responsible and practiced and experienced at the helm, doesn't mean that they're not human, they're not fallible, they're not under pressures that you're not aware of, blah, 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 ad infinitum issues that you can think of off the top of your head.
It's making me think that all developers should come with the FCA disclaimer that you get on all investments. Past performance is not an indicator of future returns, whatever the phrase is. It's like, that's slapped on every badge for everybody.
Well, I'm still a big advocate of just taking a lot of risks. Just whatever we say.
Life,
the worst case scenario.
Yeah, I think that's the point. I think we all are, and that's the point. The best risk managers that I've seen who are not trained in the way that Helen is, for example, they're very risk averse people who have this ability to kind of flick a switch at one point and go, right, it's time to go for it. Yeah. Because they don't have the switch, then they just end up in analysis paralysis. Yeah. And you can answer, one thing you do get from experience is you do see, and this is what I hope makes me a passable consultant for the people that I consult for, in that I've almost certainly done that or something like that before, or I know someone who's done it and I know how it played out. Yeah. And then hopefully I know the things to avoid and not to do so those problems don't occur. And then that can, as Helen said, you can't de-risk it completely. Of course you can't, but you take those risks out as much as possible. And part of this sort of, by talking counterparty risk, we're talking JVs, and obviously we've got two partners on the call who work very closely together. And that, I think, when people start, I don't think it was, I think I know who it was. Yeah, it was it was Emerald Fisk. She put a post up the other day saying she gets a lot of people come to her who've just met at a networking meeting and then they suddenly want to start a JV. And it's kind of like, it's the equivalent to married at first sight or whatever they call it. You know, it's bloody nuts.
Mhm.
It's absolutely nuts. So there needs to be, in the same way, there needs to be an upside. The whole needs to be greater than the sum of the parts, which I'm sure that the Hammered boys would agree. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts because they have different ways of approaching things, and that adds value to the whole. And that's what you need to look at in those situations when you do expose yourself to another person who might go to the toilet and fall down the stairs and break his leg, for example, right?
And we didn't just stumble upon this JV. We spent 5 months dating over a book. Right.
Yes.
It was courting of the most platonic variety possible.
And the most loquacious variety as well. But I mean, joking aside, that's really important. I put a comment on that post saying I didn't used to JV with people I'd known for less than 5 years. But actually, that was just too arbitrary. There is an element of insulation if they hang around in the game. But as Helen said, past performance is no guarantee of future returns. And there have been people who've been around 20 years and then their business has blown up and people have thrown money at them and they've blown up themselves. So that definitely need, you know, just by surviving and then suddenly taking a big turn in doesn't guarantee success by any stretch of the imagination. So it's not really the time they've been around, it's more the time you've spent with them. I mean, Piotr and I have been on a business retreat together, for example, years ago. It's only a week long, right? But you get to know people a lot better, and you get to form the relationship with a lot more depth when you do that sort of thing. So that needs bearing in mind as well. You've got to see by then. You've got to see what they're like when they're angry, tired, happy, solving problems under pressure. Or how could you say such a thing, Helen? To be fair, we didn't need to go out on the retreat to get drunk together, Piotr, did we? To be honest, that had happened beforehand. So
that's happened. That's it.
What's your risk appetite for 30 sambucas? That's the question. That is the question.
Awful. I'm more of a tequila risk guy. Amazing. Well, there's one book that I find kind of worked really well in this kind of subject, because people do need to take risks, but the what you take risks on depends on your own personal values, on your own personal things, on your goals and stuff like that. And I was reading this book, I think I mentioned before, called Die with Zero, and it's a book that talks about how it approaches things from a perspective of, okay, happiness is more just accumulating stuff. It's like you need to have experiences and you need to spend money. Like, it's better to die with zero money, and actually that's the goal, because you can't take money anywhere. But like the experience and everything else, that actually kind of stays with people and it kind of goes around. So basically it talks about how to basically spend money while you're on Earth and you're still alive, and when it's best to spend money in your lifetime. Like, is it best to like accumulate a massive pension and then be 65 and then start going on holidays because that's where you have the money and the time and everything else? So it talks about things like that it's better to like spend money as you go, how to approach insurance, life insurance, all this kind of things like that. And I find it fascinating that someone went into the research on when it's best to have insurance and not have insurance, and have things like that. It's fascinating and it's quite grounded in life experiences. Highly recommend.
Interesting.
And other book recommendations for risk appetite, choosing.
Well, I was. A cheesy guru phrase just came through my head, and I tend these days to fall one side of the fence or the other on them. And this one is: I heard a certain soon-to-be boxing guru say this one a while back, and it's if you don't risk anything, you risk everything. And on this side of the fence, I think bollocks to that one, really, because what you do is you guarantee yourself mediocrity, probably, right? Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Go back to how Helen started the conversation. Do you have the mental toughness to lose a lot of money sometimes? Do you have the mental toughness to lose other people's money sometimes? If you don't take that seriously, you are a sociopath, right? So bear that in mind. And then there's no point really talking to you. So I think it reminds me a little bit of there's a phrase at the end of Goodfellas when Ray Liotta's rolled over and he's, they've been telling him in court he's a rat and all the rest of it. And he has to go into witness protection. And he says something like, now I have to stand in line at the bakery like everybody else, because he used to skip the queue because he was a big mob boss sort of thing, And that's what it does mean if you don't take risk and you don't like risk. But it doesn't mean that even if you're the person who answers all the stuff on the left-hand side of the questionnaire, right? It just means you're going to have to work out lower risk or no risk ways of doing things. I've spoken with people who are on that left-hand side of the questionnaire. Their answer is, or has been, earn money, invest in property, don't use mortgages, right? Don't use mortgages. Don't become dependent on the money that it throws off, because even if it doesn't throw off any money, it's probably going to go up in value. They can normally get comfortable with property, right? They wouldn't be comfortable in the stock market. They wouldn't really be comfortable in the bond market, but they can be comfortable in residential property. It just means without using leverage and some of the other tools, they're never going to build a big portfolio, and they're never going to make the most of inflation and this and that and the other. Okay, well, that's what their risk appetite does for them, And I think Piotr was talking about as it changes throughout life. Yeah, where you take different risks when you're 18 as you do when you're older, and that's true. But and that's very much the way that the IFA/wealth management industry is trained to think. You get older, your risk appetite goes down. You start with at 18, you put £10 a month into the stock market. When you're 65, you're only putting it into bonds or you're holding it in cash, and the percentage of stocks comes down and down over time. But that just doesn't have to be the case. No. And you can go outside of that box yourself quite comfortably. I don't know what something like Die with Zero says about that, but some of the people who I really admire who are not, I admire Warren Buffett because I think he lives his best life. Yeah. But some of the people who are not famous who I admire, I see the same principles in them where they're sort of in their 70s, let's say. They've still got what I would consider the risk appetite of a perfectly healthy 25 to 45-year-old. It hasn't, their age hasn't changed their risk appetite. All they've got is more experience, and they will apply those experiences and they enjoy doing what they're doing. Now, they tend to be better valuers of their time as well, because there is an inevitability about having less time left as you get older. And that makes sense. But then I've seen some really quite dark approaches to that as well, where you've seen these posters where they have like a tally sheet with the number of weeks you've got left. I find that a bit that goes beyond my risk appetite on considering my own mortality. That's for sure. It's like I get the point, but just live your best life every day that you can. Surely, and don't worry about when the thunderbolt comes. It is what it is, right? I don't know. That's my risk appetite for death, right?
I've got a strange suggestion for a recommendation for a book on risk. Now it's an autobiography, and it's called Mr. Nice by a chap called Howard Marks.
Yes.
I don't want to ruin the book for anybody, but it has one of the best jokes in it ever. You have to read it because this guy understood risk and reward in one of the most unconventional ways I think that you can. And he paid the price for the risks he took. and the book talks through his whole process of coming to terms with that. It's a short book. I think on Audible you could listen to it start to finish in 3 hours. So it's probably a car journey and back from Middlesbrough or whatever. But it's very unconventional, and it's one of only about 6 or 7 autobiographies that I've read. I don't really take a great deal of interest in.
Jay, we need to
Famous
talk.
people
I
in their
just
lives.
googled who this guy was.
Yes. No, but yes, I mean, when I said unconventional, I wasn't understating the level of this guy. It was completely out there. The book, it's a brilliant book. I mean, I don't read many autobiographies, as I've said, but this one was really very good. So I just recommend, if you want to understand what risk looks like outside of investment, outside of in property, and how someone deals with it and then comes to terms with paying the cost of losing that risk return battle, it is worth looking at that. The fact that it's emotional and funny at the same time makes it a very palatable read. But I just thought I'd just
It's
off the wall.
definitely a very off the wall suggestion, but brilliant. It's
Cool. I'll download that for my next plane journey.
Yes.
Amazing. Okay, well, really good. Well, today we need to wrap up a little bit earlier than usual, but I think we covered quite a bit in this conversation. Sometimes more than other weeks when you spend an hour on the chat. But it's it's been entertaining, and thanks everyone for the comments. And anything else before we wrap up, guys?
I think it would be great to kind of hear from the audience how they measure risk, what they see as risky, and what they would stay away from, because that's going to be brilliant learnings. We may resonate with that, and or other people in the audience may resonate with that. So just share what you find risky, or how you manage risk, or what you've done in the past to mitigate risk, and how you're going to carry that learning experience forward. That would be super impressive to see.
Amazing. Great suggestions. Well, thank you everyone for listening in. Thank you guys for contributing. And we'll be back as usual next week. Great Sunday.
Have a great week.